Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Subscribing to My Podcast. Because I have a new guest on the show every week, it's very difficult to get consistent viewership. So if there's one thing that you can do to support me and the guest featured on my show, is by interacting with the video. You can always unsubscribe later if you hate me or the content. Without further ado, here's your episode with Matthew Pfab is the current president of the Secular Student Alliance here on Iowa State's campus. If you'll know, one of the origins of this show was interviewing the former named Atheist and Agnostic Society with James, and then now it's come full circle with new royalty, new rebranding, and then I've met Matthew a few times at Philosophy Club, and we've had some good conversations, but now it's time to put him in the seat and hear some of his views and then hear about the club. But Matthew, I'd like to give this opportunity for you to kind of introduce yourself and tell viewers maybe some of the things that they should know about you, or just hit on any of the introduction that I missed. But go ahead, Matthew, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Matthew Pfab, the president of the Secular Student Alliance. So a bit about me. I grew up in northeastern Iowa, so that's very Catholic. Basically, everyone there is Catholic. Your neighbors are Catholic, Catholic schools, just everything. And I went to Catholic school from elementary school all the way through high school. I've remained mostly a Catholic throughout college, and then the last year, things got a bit spicy, and now I'm the president of the Secular Student Alliance, and I'm the boogeyman.
Yeah, for sure. What do you mean things got a little spicy? Like, what does that mean? If you could tell me.
So if you're familiar with like religious deconstruction, it's like the process where like you're questioning everything that you've been taught over all these years, and you're realizing that you don't really believe much of them, and then you start looking at like the reasons why people believe them, and then you kind of you're just confused, you're baffled, and you're like, what the actual hell happened here? And then you're basically throwing away any sort of community you had. You're challenging all of your beliefs, all your assumptions, things that you were taught by your family, and it's a very isolating experience, but it's also a very, very fun experience too, because you can kind of just start looking at like, hey, why do people do that? And then you usually go down the little rabbit hole and you realize, wow, that's really stupid.
Yeah.
People do that. I don't have to do that.
Do you have like specific moments or specific things, like if someone were to be kind of going through this right now, what would be some of the diagnosis? Like,
okay. So generally it's when you are listening to like a religious sermon and then you start finding yourself disagreeing with them more than you're not, or more than you're agreeing with them. And then it gets to a point where you're like actively challenging them in your head. It's like, what? You're talking about demons? Really? You're not thinking about all these other reasons why this person could have done something? You're using demons? We're at this point, and this is like a priest who's like representing massive Catholic organizations, and I'm just like arguing him in my head. And then I start thinking of like questions to get him, like just difficult questions to ask, and they can never answer them.
Right. And so it just kind of like, it's a war that you're kind of waging in your head, and then you're slowly like moving away from these things. And then was there ever a breaking point, like something that you heard that you're like, okay, this is it. I'm going as an atheist or agnostic or whatever you.
Yeah. I think it was kind of a death of a thousand cuts.
Right.
Like, okay, I don't believe in this personal God that everyone believes in, but like, yeah, there could be a creator. We don't really know what he wants though. Mm-hmm. But it seems like a lot of people do know what he wants and are telling other people to do things based on what they know what he wants. Okay, moving on to that. Then just chopping off bits and bits of it as I go along. But I think I was finally done when I realized just the whole premise of Christianity is basically God gave a tree. He left it in a garden for people to eat the fruit. And it's basically just him telling them, hey, fuck around and find out. See what happens. It's like giving a toddler a loaded gun and then blaming the toddler for what happens when he accidentally fires it. And I realized this cannot be like a way to like encourage people to be a good person.
Yeah, right. Well, and I never found necessarily the origin of the story very appealing. It's hard to understand, and I think even like Christians are a little bit confused on like what it means, and we're discovering new things about it. Like there's this new thing that I keep hearing that the serpent was actually like is supposed to be Jesus, like not actually like Satan or even evil. Like cunning is actually like a positive term, as in like he understands, and then that's like something that's accepted by Christians, and it very much changes the views of, and then even then they'll talk about things where they'll say the actual origin of it, the snake was saying like, well, God says if you eat this apple, you will die, and then the snake's like, you're not going to die. You're just going to know what he knows. Yeah. Both those things are true.
Both are true.
And when they ate it, they didn't die. But I guess you'll say like, it's a moral death.
Or even it's like you didn't die, but I'm going to kill you after it.
Yeah. Full transparency. I am very supportive of the morals that the Bible purports and the ideas and themes that are within it. Yeah. The actual truth value of whether these things happen is not something I'm going to defend because I just don't think it matters very much.
It doesn't. And I'd agree with you on that as well. But in certain cases of reading the Bible, there is a lot of wisdom in that book. Yeah. But then it depends on who's reading it, why they're reading it, what they're going to do with it, and then we get into the mess.
Yeah, and this is very true. So I guess we'll start on a more positive note because I don't want to come out swinging, and I think it's important that you base what you're talking about because I think that the Bible is an incredible book, and I think that it is an easy way to teach very good values to people. And I think that is very effective, and I think that it's actually necessary. Okay. Maybe not specifically from the Bible, but organized religion I think is very necessary to find an easy way for people who don't want to think too much about how they should live their lives to kind of like push them towards a better direction. So I'm very supportive of like religion in general and the Bible in general because it does these things very well. Okay. I guess like, how do you feel about that? Or like, do you kind of understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah,
how do you feel
I get where
you're
coming from that. And I think to a certain extent, I would agree that if we're trying to create a moral society, having an easy way to teach morals is a good idea.
Easy and effective.
Yeah. But the problem, I think, is that people kind of just do what they want to do regardless, and they'll just map on the morals onto whatever they're doing after they've done it. And they'll kind of just twist this book to fit whatever their agenda is.
Yeah, and that's probably true.
From my experience, like within Catholicism, there's a lot of rules. Like it doesn't seem like it on paper because barely anyone follows them. But if you actually follow the rules of Catholicism, you will go insane. And they don't really help you be a better person. They mostly just tell you what not to do. They don't really tell you what to do. It's just do this or you're going to get punished. And I don't think that's a really good motivator for if we're trying to create like truly good people. It's a good motivator if we want to create compliant people and submissive people that will submit to authority or just follow rules that can be used to make them do heinous things without knowing. But I don't really think it necessarily is like a good thing per se. That being said, some people can read it in a way that helps them become a better person. There are a lot of really good readings of some of the books of the Bible, and I guess a lot of the stuff in the Gospels still holds up pretty well. And honestly, comparing some of the stuff that I read from the Bible to what I was experiencing in my church, like that caused me to deconstruct faster because it's like, why aren't the Christians Christianing?
Yeah, well, and I understand what you're saying. I do think that I fear that some people have gotten pretty internet brained about like how the conversation actually is, or like what percentage of people are doing what percentage of things. Yeah. And I think that the internet has definitely ruined all of our scaling on how big certain issues are and how little certain issues are. I would wager that 80+% of religious people are like the okay to good kind of religion, that it's like been primarily beneficial and caused them to do good things. That's a total bro statistic, but just like gauging what I'd imagine it is.
Just like more people are good with religion.
Way more people are good because of religion. And then obviously there are these like terrible things that have happened because of religion. Yeah. And then also these just awful takes that have happened because of religion as well, that like we can talk about and we can look at. I just think we have to like size the things. Like these are all of like the warning labels that come before.
And I'm glad you're bringing it up, because I think my view on religion right now is less of like religion is separate from all these other types of social institutions, and it's more so just another one. So like someone can have their religion, they could have their economic status, they could have their politics, and these all kind of intersect and overlap with each other based on whatever their situation in society is at the moment. And they're all going to be pushing like different narratives of like what would be a good person kind of thing. And to a certain point, like I don't even think we can argue just religion, but we can look at its role in how society is organized and how it's leading to, I guess, some negative outcomes, but also positive outcomes. I think that's important to mention with religion.
Yeah, it's hard to weigh. And like I said, it comes from convenience. I feel like a lot of the importance of religion truthfully comes from this, but it doesn't necessarily invalidate it or mean that it's like a bad thing. Like it serves its role and it serves its purpose. And I think it does it well. I do think though that like, especially as of recently, it has kind of infected certain areas, and like you'll be talking to people. I'll talk to people who are very religious, and they'll slowly smuggle in political, like straight up political things, like into the religious conversation. And I'll be like, well, did you even realize that what you're talking about is not even like biblical? Like you just smuggled in something. Like they'll be talking and then they'll just like bring up like immigration. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I
don't think they were worried about that in 2000 BC.
Oh yeah, exactly. So I definitely think it's been muddled. And we'll get into this too with Christian nationalism. But I wanted to kind of give you, just an opportunity to talk about like maybe some of the things that you respect or understand at least about theists, or about like people who are in this camp. Like, I guess, talk to me about your positive experiences with Catholicism while you're growing up, and then also like now that you're here, like what you see.
So I actually had an interesting background with Catholicism in this regard, because I don't have like any of the usual horror stories about it, like no crazy priest incidents, no like nuns whipping me in Catholic school. Everyone was generally really friendly, very open, community focused. Like you could just sit down and talk to priests about whatever, they would be available. People generally like cared about other people in the community. And it was a good background for me in terms of religion. Like it gave me meaning of like working with a community towards something, caring about other people. And like the way the Bible was taught was pretty loose. Like it wasn't taught as like this objective fact that you need to interpret in a certain way. It was very much yes, these are the stories. This is what you should be getting from the stories. But they were also written at a certain time, certain place. Different authors wrote different books. It was pretty reasonable in that regard. I think the problem that I experienced, though, was how we would have religion class, but we'd also have math, science, English. Like, it's putting all of these on the same weight.
Yeah.
So like I was I got into school. So like if I'm going to learn all these, I better learn this one too. And like then you kind of go down the rabbit hole of what's a sin, what's not a sin, how am I going to hell? And then you like the actual ideas alone can be enough to break someone, which I think is not talked about enough with religion. But at the same time, there are other ways of interpreting these same ideas.
When you say break somebody, like as in like hurt them, like hurt the way they view like, their lives and stuff like this? Or
like self-denial, mental breakdowns, like the way that they talk about sexuality, for example, is so ridiculously specific, and like every aspect of it is a sin. And like I'm ace. I don't feel any sexual attraction. I didn't know that back then.
Yeah.
I thought I was, and apparently that was a sin. So now I'm more focused on this than me just not caring. Like,
Right. Asexuality is a sin?
no, it's like lusting after people. So I was thinking, am I feeling lust towards people? No,
Oh,
no, I
I see.
wasn't.
Oh, so you're immune. Wait, you're overpowered.
Exactly. I should be overpowered. And like, I'd look at other people like talking about struggling with this stuff. I'm like, it's not that hard.
Yeah.
Just get better.
yeah. Try harder, guys. I don't know what's going on with you. That's crazy. That's really funny. Yeah, I think you had said something about like mental break and kind of denying the self. My perspective on this is that this is a very good thing, but I don't think I've been around enough people to where it sent them over the edge, to where it like hurt. I'm skeptical of this idea because I am very like sacrifice the now for the future oriented. Like that's just how I'm built. Like it's like make things harder now so you are a better person later, or like improving in these kinds of ways. That's how I've been wired. But I'm very interested in your perspective. Like, what does that look like when people are sent over the edge and it kind of like breaks the natural self like that?
At least from my perspective, when you read this stuff, it's like, okay, logically, I could die at any minute. And this is like a 10-year-old thinking this.
yeah.
Like,
This is true.
I could die at any minute. So I need to be in a state of like grace with God in case I'm dead. And to do this, I need to keep track of what I'm doing at all times, all the day. And like with Catholicism, you can actually unload all your sins by confessing to a priest. And like, sins can be very personal, very like you would not be sharing this with some like 50-year-old man in a box. But like, I don't want to go to hell. So I'm going to be stressing about this, thinking about this instead of worrying about school. I'm worried about this. And it's just like, it's policing yourself over every single little action to such an insane degree that like you don't really have freedom to explore who you are because you're too busy submitting everything to this idea instead.
If you were to look at the things that Catholicism would tell you to subdue, now that you've experienced it and now that you're like older, you've been through things, how do you feel about like, are these like correct things to subdue?
Oh no, most
but like,
are wrong.
Okay, this is interesting because my perspective is that these are correct things to subdue generally, but you should experience them so you know why they should be. You shouldn't have people telling you to subdue them to subdue them. Like you have to discover the consequences of being hypersexual all the time. You have to discover the consequences of like overeating. You have to discover these things.
And I'd agree with that. And I think that actually might be the main issue I have is that they focus way too much on the actions and not the causes of the actions. So like addiction to sexuality, addiction to alcohol, addiction to food, like all this stuff is caused by similar things usually. But the way that it's talked about is like kind of compartmentalized into all these different, like, I guess, what are they? The 7 deadly sins. Lust is different than gluttony, different than envy, but it's usually all kind of similar of like my needs are not currently being met. And I need to figure out what those needs are, why I don't feel like they're getting them met, and then engage with that part of me in a more honest way instead of focusing on, I can't eat this, I can't eat this, I can't do this, I can't do that. Like,
yeah, it's taught with missing pieces.
Yeah.
But I do think though that like with the perspective that I have now, like the concept of just not eating those things is kind of the solution. It just has to come with more knowledge than like just that. You have to know why. It's like you have to have that internal motivation of like, I'm not eating this because if I do, I'm going to not look the way I do, which makes me sad in the future. Or I'm not going to be able to do the things that I want to do, which makes me sad. And you know what I mean? Like you have to like do these things. The answer was to not eat this. But if you have no grasp as to like why, unrelated to because God says so, there's no reason. Like I imagine that's super uncomfortable.
Because like you don't know what you're doing. You're just kind of wandering around in the dark like, oh, I don't want to, I guess I shouldn't do this. Or I'm seeing other people do it. They probably shouldn't be doing it either. Are they going to hell? And then you go down a really uncomfortable rabbit hole there.
Well, and this is interesting. In the feedback form, not the feedback form, the questionnaire that you filled out, you said that whether or not God exists isn't actually the important question.
No, I don't think it is.
And I want to hear about this because I'm going to relate it to what we're talking about, but I want to hear about you.
So from what I can tell in my experiences with religion, God is a completely contextual term. It means different things in different situations. Like, he could mean the community, the unity of the community. This is the will of God, and you've disobeyed it. We're ostracizing you. Or it could mean like just awestruck at the beauty of nature. Like, look at what God did here. And you're like looking at like some mountain or something. It could mean just authority, like do it because God wants it. And a priest, a pastor, someone could be telling someone to do something horrific or force someone to like be in a compromising situation because like God has willed it. Also, God could be just like something more hazy and good, like love, like this feeling of love that people has throughout the world. That could be God. There's so many ways to use it. And the problem is that everyone using it thinks they're using it in the same way that everyone else is using it. So then you get all these arguments of like the edgy atheist is like, oh, God is dead. We've killed him. We've done all this. And like, then the other person will be like, no, there's still good in the world. God is still here. And then someone else might be, no, God is still here. Like, get back in here. Like, obey.
Right. Well, surely everyone's talking about what God can do differently, but they're talking about the same capital G, right?
Which is usually, if I want to simplify it to the most simple thing, God means I'm right. I'm much more interested, instead of like when I go to a church, not in the actual church, but what the individual people say what God is. And it's like different for all of them. But they're all kind of united under this like greater umbrella. And I think generally you can apply that to any society again. Like, I don't think religion is the only one. Like, this could be like productivity and like capital of like, how do I become more productive, get more things done for like, what else could it be? God, Greeks might be like the good. Mm-hmm. There's basically just like this call to like truth, objective order. Basically all of that could just be God or anything else, really.
Yeah.
It's more of the organizational value.
Yeah. And this is interesting. I do think though that like when people are talking about God, they mean generally it's some sort of whatever is big enough and powerful enough to create the universe, facilitate it, and then like know everything. It's like generally it's like an all-knowing, all-seeing. There's some sort of, definition of what they mean by God. And then people are talking about all these different things. I guess, are you saying that it's reached so much of like what it is to be that like it doesn't even really matter if it's real or not? Okay. And that makes sense.
You could go for like a whole, the universe is God. We could go for God just created the universe. He's a force. We could go to God is personally involved in my life.
I see what you're saying. Yes. And this is wildly interesting to me. I'm currently in the midst of a generally religious debate with somebody, incredibly respectful person, very cool. And the essence of this, my opinion is that whether or not God is real does not matter for the essence of Christianity. And I don't see why it should. In that, like, if you found out for fact that God is not real, that shouldn't change how you were acting. And if it does, that has to be immoral. Like, I just don't get, like, you should have another thing tying you down to the way that you act, not just that something tells you to do that. Yeah. There should be some other cause that's like, and it's also good because of this. Like, God can say it and that's a reason why, but you all should be like, but it also is beneficial to me and others. Yeah. Or something like that. And that leaves this weird thing to where it's like, religiously, like, if God is real, do I go to heaven? I didn't say 100% that he was real. Like these other people do. Do I, you know what I mean? And that's kind of how this debate is sparked. But I do like what you're saying, that like God could mean anything, and you're taking it in a more I guess like atheistic lens of like, this is why it doesn't even matter. To me, it's more of like a moral, like I don't understand its purpose at all to acknowledge that God exists. But I like referring to God as the universe or the way that thing is, the way that things are, because I feel like that's how we use it anyway, whether he's a person or not. It shouldn't
shorthand.
It shouldn't necessarily matter if he's a person. I'm still just describing like something that's good or like whatever made the universe this way. Whether it's
truth, what's right, what's just.
Yeah, exactly. So that's an interesting perspective that in the end, we're all saying the same word, but we're kind of talking about different things.
And we go to very different conclusions.
Yeah,
which I think is the fun part.
Which I actually don't know about that. I feel like humans agree on like 95% of things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or at least all of their things come from a very similar basis of like, I want to care about people in this way, or like, and that's how morality is. And then these external things that have been talked up so much that now determine way more than they actually do.
Yeah.
Like your opinion on LGBTQ is 0.00001% of like how your life actually matters or is, yet it is 25% of thought. You know what I mean? Which is just not an accurate representation of how people are,
No.
And so I don't know. I think generally when you say people come to different conclusions, I'd caveat it with like the conversation comes to very different conclusions. People are generally pretty chill.
Yeah.
Just like how it is, but
I think the conversation then becomes the interesting part, because that's like, it's what's creating the narratives. It's what's driving societies to pick up weapons. it's
become how people think, you know what I mean? Which is so wild. Like it's no longer a conversation, and like I've very dislike, and you hopefully maybe you feel this way because you had different experiences, but people will attribute malice to like someone being pro-life is because they hate women.
Oh, actually, I do have an interesting perspective on that.
Yeah, so that'd be interesting. So like someone who's pro-life hates women, and that's why it's like, okay,
No.
come on. Like
There's so many.
Is that
like,
really what you
nuances to
think is
that.
happening here? And it's the same thing with like religion. Like they're religious because they're bigoted. Come on. They're human too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If they're religious, you could, at the nicest thing or the meanest thing you should say is they're religious because they're dumb. That's it. You don't have to be so evil. Like they're evil, So I guess I hope you don't. I guess I hope you don't feel that way.
Oh,
but,
I do not at all. I think like the pro-life thing is actually really interesting, because that was something I thought about for a while. Because like Catholic school, you have a lot of pro-life stuff going on. Like Catholicism was pro-life before the pro-life movement started. Or I guess in this case, I mean anti-abortion.
I have some questions about this, but yeah. Go ahead.
They basically teach you that abortion is killing babies. Like there are babies being killed, and you're drilling this into like 7-8-year-olds. They're being shown the pictures of the babies, or the purported pictures of babies being aborted. You're drawing pictures of abortions to win pro-life contests. They're shuttling you to DC to protest abortion, and you're like, what, 7th, 8th grade?
What the heck? They really are starting you that young.
Yeah.
Having this conversation that young is like, it's so complicated. Like, I don't even know why you'd even start. I guess it's easy, right? But like, dang.
And like, you're surrounded by Catholics who are all kind of in on this.
Yeah.
Like, they just believe, abortion is killing babies. And then they'll call it pro-life. And then you start applying like pro-life to a bunch of other stuff that apparently they support or don't support. And then the whole thing falls apart. But I don't even. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess a good example is capital punishment. From my experience, Catholics are very interested in capital punishment, specifically the death penalty. And like, hey, we could do this. They're bad people. Let's kill them.
Right.
Or like poverty. No one ever really seems interested in solving poverty so much as there's still poor people to care about. Or like even just pro-life, the mothers aren't really cared for after the baby is born. No one is supported. It's just, we got the baby to term. And it kind of paints a different picture of, I don't think they're actually pro-life. I think they're anti-abortion.
And Yeah, and that can be true. Although I will say, like, the distinction that pro-life people will probably make with the capital punishment thing is that it's the unjustified murder of people, which is just like the.
But then it's just an
win card,
arbitrary line of like who's justified. Oh, God's saying this.
Well,
now.
I guess they'd say that like a baby is never a justified murder. A baby. There's steps before.
Yeah.
This is, and I've said this multiple times with the abortion thing. The only conversation that matters is whether it's like a human life worth considering. That's the only conversation. All these other things I just think are so, like when people say like my body, my choice, it's such an obvious disregard for what the conversation is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The conversations are like kind of going
Exactly.
past
And
each
it's the
other.
same way with pro-life stuff too, when you say like stuff like this. But like capital punishment would be like, it isn't a life caring about because they did terrible things.
Exactly.
Or whatever. And then with the poverty thing, they would say like that the poor people are going to exist no matter what is the idea. And that like we just need to elevate what it means to be poor, which there is kind of a sound argument that has been the case, that like the lives of poor people have increased substantially from like what poor used to mean 200 years ago. Being poor now is like luxury. This is not an argument that I'm making, but it's like the concept, you know what I mean? So there are ways around this. But I do like that is very interesting about like getting trained day one in pro-life boot camp at like 7 years old is wild to me. That is really wild. But I had a conversation with a Catholic guy on the show actually. So go check that out. But he was telling me that abortion or like the pro-life ideology is like a tenet of Catholicism. Like it is like an unspoken rule. It will be this way until the earth ceases to exist.
Oh, they always say that before new doctrine happens. Like, oh, new dogma dropped. Hey, add this. Okay.
How often does that happen?
Okay, a good example is priests.
Okay.
So priests famously cannot be married. And they're like, okay, this goes all the way back to Jesus. He's never married. It's tradition. But actually, priests were allowed to be married until about the year, I want to say 1100. They were no longer allowed to be married because they were passing down the Catholic Church's land rights to their descendants, and the church didn't want to lose that.
Oh so my God.
Like, you can't marry anymore. It's always been like this.
I see. Are there other ones? Like maybe
plenty.
Like more
abortion
recently?
Became a big deal like in the, I want to say like late 1800s, like when they realized how conception works. They had to figure out like, it's basically like a Christianity plot hole of like, okay, Jesus didn't just appear in Mary. He was conceived. Like, how do we resolve this? That the Son of God was conceived. Like, I guess his life started at conception. Like, he had to have been this God man the moment the cells were dividing. So I guess we got to apply that to everything else.
Well, but they haven't. It's still a miracle. Yes, like in the Catholic religion, or did they just accept that was?
The miracle is not like. Well, I guess it's that the Virgin Mary had a child, but also that the Virgin Mary had no sin about her to like corrupt the child as it was developing.
Okay.
It's a bunch of very, very, very esoteric lore. But they use that to justify the abortion before it kind of got going in the other churches in the 80s.
Okay, this is very interesting.
Because the other start of the pro-life movement, I think, is much spicier. But we can talk about that later with Christian nationalism.
Yeah, true. Yeah, so you've been building up your expertise and some of your interest in the new, I guess, like what people, the buzzword is Christian nationalism. Walk me through that and like what are some of the discoveries that you've made? I know you just watched a documentary and talked to somebody, but I guess like give me your pitch about Christian nationalism.
Okay, so basically I've been down the rabbit hole, and I've been down the rabbit hole for years. Like my family was very conservative, but they weren't all that Catholic. They were very lax with their religion. I didn't see any crucifixes around the house. I didn't see like them doing much with the church except sending us to Catholic school, sending us to church every Sunday. Like, hey, we're a good Catholic family. But they were very interested in conservatism. They would listen to like all the big hits, like Rush Limbaugh is playing, Glenn Beck's playing, they're all playing. I'm hearing them like, I wouldn't say 24 hours a day, but it felt like it sometimes.
Right. Okay.
But it was so interesting seeing where they contradicted with Catholicism. And since I was so big on like following all the rules of Catholicism, I'm like, okay, these people are also talking about God. Like, I think they are probably along the same lines, so maybe I should be paying more attention to what they're saying. But it becomes apparent very quickly that there are some different ideas being thrown around. And
do you have examples of like...
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some. I guess a big one would be prosperity gospel, where it's like built off this Protestant idea of God will reward people in like their normal life, not just heaven. And you'll be able to tell how rewarded you are by your wealth.
Okay.
So like you'll see these mega church pastors being celebrated by like conservatives usually of like, these are godly men, when you'll usually hear about some crazy affair they had or misuse of church funds. And they're like, oh, he's fine. Don't worry about it.
Well, I guess like the idea though is that you can be Christian and be a bad Christian and still be Christian, you know what I mean? Or like, I mean, the essence of sin is that it can be forgiven, or that like everyone does it.
But no one apologizes. That was one thing that I liked about Catholicism, as much as it messed me up, is you had to apologize for what you did to get forgiven. But a lot of these people can just kind of brush it off, and it feels very much like a way of hiding power and like securing it to certain groups. And as I kind of followed, or I guess as I left Christianity, I started deconstructing like the politics as well. I was already kind of deconstructing it. It's like, so why are we hating gay people again? Like that kind of stuff.
So that has to be a mess, huh?
Yeah.
To like decipher all of this like it's political
like,
jargon.
Where does one go into the other?
Yeah.
And eventually it came to the point that's like, no, they kind of became one and the same at a certain point. And I think I can point that to like why all the Catholics seem very much interested in Donald Trump of all people.
Yeah. Like, yeah, this is wild to me too.
It's someone who has taught all these moral values of like things I should live up to. Why him?
Yeah.
Why are we supporting this guy? Like Joe Biden, he's a Catholic. Yeah. He supports abortion though.
Yeah. Right. Well, and that's what I'm saying. Like, it seems like it's such a, just like kind of like a buzzword. Like, it's just kind of like, this helps me with my base, and I don't think there's any adherence to it. I do also think though that if someone doesn't necessarily represent Catholicism well, that doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't Catholic.
No, yeah, I agree
if anything, a person who fails a lot is a good representation of a religious person. You know what I mean? Because they're not perfect. But it's that extra step of seeking perfection, or like asking forgiveness, apologizing for these things, being transparent about the ways that you fail. That's religion. You know, that's religious. But these people don't do that.
For that.
And you don't.
Someone do that anyways. Like, I feel like I got more moral after leaving religion and being like, haha, morals don't exist. Why am I acting more moral?
Yeah. Well, how would you say so? Like, talk to me about this.
I'm like more thinking about the actual context of the situation of like, what am I doing? How am I affecting the other person? What are the causes behind what I am doing? Is it like insecurity? Is it some need that isn't being met? Can I examine that deeper and figure that out so I don't do the bad behaviors again and pursue good behaviors according to like my own values, which if they got me this far, I think they're pretty good.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of, it seems as if that's what we're going to end up just landing on with a lot of this, is that like you can do that same retrospective behavior and land on being religious. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can land on not being religious, but it's that act of questioning that is so crucial and important, like discovery, like doing these things, testing out, thinking about them, landing on a result that is fundamental to you, and then working from there. Because the problem is that you've just been told to do these things, and then now you're thinking about them.
And that's the main issue I'd have with Christian nationalism, is that they aren't really so much interested in like preaching morals. It's much more about power and like, how do we get power? How do we retain power? And like, it becomes independent of religion, because like I'm watching all of these different denominations who are feuding for so long over the dumbest things. Like, there's been a trend of like anti-Catholicism in the country for like centuries. But now they're all buddy with the evangelical churches all of a sudden over like abortion, over immigrants, over the gays. Like, why now? Why this? And then like you look at it and it's like, okay, there is an actual movement of like fundamentalist evangelicals that's been going since like the 1900s. Like, well, it's been going longer than that, but they've been able to consolidate political power in like the 70s, and they've been distributing a way of thinking to churches by like inviting pastors to like free events, talking them up, giving them materials. Hey, you should support this issue. You should support this topic. Then having the pastors go back and tell it to their congregation that you should vote for Reagan. And like, we've created a massive, powerful political bloc that we can organize easily and are not taxed because they're churches. And we can organize them under something like abortion because segregation is no longer working for us. We need a new topic. We're doing abortion now. Like, you will notice the pro-life movement, as it's like currently known, started years after Roe v. Wade. Like, it did not start right away. It started a few years after.
Oh, because it took them time to plan.
Yeah, they're like,
game plan.
What are we going with here?
Yeah.
Obviously, racism doesn't work anymore. People don't like that.
Yeah.
Abortion.
Yeah. And this is wild. And I think it's I think you'll just find that I like what you're saying, but I'm always just going to be like slowly moving you towards the middle of whatever if it's like hyper religious, hyper atheist. My goal is just to bring you wherever you're at towards the middle. But I think that like, it's not necessarily a wrong issue or it's like abortion's not necessarily a wrong issue. It's, you just need to understand the origin of it and understand where the motivations can come from and these things. Cause it's not necessarily bad that they did these things. And it's not even necessarily bad that religion and politics have been intertwined. It's how this is used that
it's so like
specifically
it's manufactured, it feels like. And I think that's what I hate the most about it, of like a religious person. I really like talking to them because like they've clearly thought about their faith. They're practicing it. It feels very organic, like regardless of the truth of it, they've kind of applied this narrative to their life and they're living their life through it. With this, though, it feels like people are just being fed talking points of like, we want a Christian nation full of Christians. We're going to get rid of the immigrants. We're going to do all this other stuff. And it's like, how is this spiritual? How is this religious? Like, what is this even? It's like, it's like white patriarchy, basically. Yeah. And like, that favors the wealthy. And where's the Christianity part? I don't think it's there anymore. And I think my experiences has just been kind of like watching an old friend die. Yeah. Like, as bad as Christianity has been in the past, or people practicing Christianity, like the religion itself is kind of independent of people because people will kind of just do what they want with it. And it's a useful narrative for people. And I don't mind it being there, but when it's this easily co-opted by bad actors, it just kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, I think it gets weaponized a lot. I do think that the inverse can be pretty bad too. Like, you shouldn't necessarily write off the political affiliations of a person because they represent like Christianity as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And even the idea of like bringing Christianity towards like whiteness in general is kind of like a complex step that like,
yeah, I could explain that more.
Yeah, like you'll want to justify like the steps that, before you bring that into, because that's a whole other thing too.
There's a lot of interesting stuff going there of like, we need more good Christian babies. We need to stop abortion, so we'll have more Christian babies. What are these Christian babies? Where are they coming from? Like, and it's like this tradition of like, yeah, this country was founded by Christians. It ignores the native people. It just focuses on the white pilgrims bringing Christianity, specifically a form of Christianity that was so crazy that all the other Christians are like, leave, get away from us. Yeah. And they're like, okay, we're going over here. And so weird. Like, the more you go down this rabbit hole of like, surely I don't think most people actually believe this, but the people directing the power want this. And like the Supreme Court is a great example of this, of the main goal of pushing abortion is to get that conservative Supreme Court. We need an issue that's focused on like a court issue to get people mad about so we can appoint more justices to get our agenda through.
Right. Do you think, I mean, surely you have people, or there's like an argument to be made on the pro-life side that's genuine, right?
Oh, there
that, like,
are some, but generally, like, I thought I had some, but I changed my mind when I read the science and started thinking more about what it means to be alive, what it means to be a person, where I think most of the pro-life arguments kind of break down and they become kind of these weird, either emotional things or like victim blamey things.
Yeah, I think the pro-life thing is interesting because I feel like there's two kinds of perspectives, and I've very recently changed my perspective on abortion because I wouldn't even say it's changed. It's been defined much better. But originally it was like, I'm not morally bought into pro-life. Like there's something intuitive about the conversation that just doesn't seem like, no, a one-cell organism is not dying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's something intuitive about that. But logically, it had been presented to me as true for pro-life. And then it is now changed to where like I have like a specific stipulation of like this moment or whatever. And it's changed since then. And I'm pretty transparent about that. However, when you're looking at abortion, you can look at it from the perspective of the child and be like, this, you are killing something and it is feeling this death. But pro-life people, I think, take it out to this universal thing of the world is experiencing this death because a person is not living. That's an important thing to
and
address.
I think that's good to bring it up because I just remembered one of my favorite arguments against pro-life that I don't think I've heard that often. But when I look at how many abortions are performed, like the person that does the most abortions would be God. Because like the body does naturally abort fetuses developing. Why are we not going after God?
True.
Why are we going after the abortion doctor?
Yeah, we should strike him down. Yeah, but I do think I don't necessarily like pinning abortion as the issue that is 100% weaponized because there is an interesting and real argument to be had.
There is something there, but I think
it's
a
not
good
happening.
chunk of it is the weird patriarchy stuff.
Yeah.
Just based on what
the argument is not happening, but it is there. It does exist.
And I was interested in it for a bit.
Yeah, and if you talk to somebody about it, and you're talking to someone who has no allegiance to anything, you'll hear that argument. They'll say like, but it just feels wrong. And that's because it is. There is something there that is wrong. You know, you're stopping something from being able to happen. Is that immoral? I don't know. You need to figure that out.
That's why I think just getting rid of morals, or like me getting rid of morals and just being like, how is this? Like, how are people feeling about this? Like, what is the drive behind it? I feel like I understand much more of society based on like that instead of just being like, no, it's good, no, it's bad. I think it's that gray area where the most interesting stuff happens.
Well, that's where I say like this combination of politics and religion. I wonder how easy it is to parse for people because I've been so politics brained for a while now that for me, it's really easy to like hear these things and be like, okay, this is obviously not like a political take. This is a religious thing that they threw in there or vice versa. So it's easy for me to dissect these things, but I could absolutely see like boomers seeing these things on TikTok and they're like, they can't do it. They don't understand it. So I guess like how serious of an issue do you think that this is?
I think it's very serious for the fact that one of the main purposes of religion is that community aspect. And if these communities are being fed this information and people are reinforcing it off of each other, they are kind of necessarily becoming coupled. Or like you don't have people doing these kind of private soul searching kind of things. You're having this group of people being I want to say manipulated by people with an actual political agenda and are kind of just going along with it because suddenly voting becomes this moral issue of like, if you do not vote for Donald Trump, you are a bad person. And people are trying to reconcile their Christianity with that. And like, I think honestly, that's a very good reason why Christianity is declining so quickly, is a lot of people, like there's only so much cognitive dissonance you can experience before you're like, okay, is this religion just wrong or are the politics wrong? Like I know there are like more left-leaning churches, but like I think people just become so alienated with it after their experience and like their church kind of goes off the deep end that they just don't want to go back to it.
Yeah, and that's very true. And I think I had a really cool point to make, but I don't think I can remember it. Dang, I had a really cool point and I can't remember what it was. But yeah, these things are kind of combined, and I think it's hard for people to separate them, especially with like voting and like saying that it's a moral issue, but it kind of is a moral issue. Like politics generally stems from something moral, you know, and so I think that's important to gauge what these people are feeling. But it's hard if you're being like manipulated, and it's hard if you're being lied to. And I wonder if these new churches or like, I hear a lot when I talk about the rejection of like LGBTQ people or even just like liberal people in general in the church. When you talk to church people about that, they'll say like, no, we don't actually do that. Like we want to accept them. We want to teach them that what they're doing is wrong, and then to have them
That's the key
change.
part right here.
Yeah.
It's like we accept them so long as they are not liberal.
Yeah, well, it'd be like we accept them and then we're going to help them change. But I know a lot of people who are like really close to people that they pretty severely disagree with when it comes to these things, but they continue to be close with them or like try to help them or like whatever the thing is. Do you think that this is just cope, that like this is a new idea and this is not the way it was and people are just trying to like gather the lost Christians, you know, by like, no guys, we're good. We'll accept you, you know?
Yeah, I think it's cope.
Okay.
Like
okay.
a big part of why this Christian nationalism movement has been getting so big is that they know that their time is limited. Demographics do not like it at all. Like they are losing, like Christianity is shrinking in the US and they need to keep it as this powerful voting bloc, keep it for long enough that they get complete power and then off to the races. But that's not happening. People are leaving Christianity by the droves. And if anything, they're accelerating it.
Yeah.
It's like, how do we keep as many people in the fold as possible while we try and get Donald Trump elected and do Project 2025? Like, it's going to be difficult.
How do you, well, I think a lot of conservatives would hear this and say that the declining in Catholicism is the cause of the problems they would then purport. Oh. So they'd say like the civil unrest is because of people not being Christian. Like maybe like a decline in birth rates is because of people not being Christian, or like the rise of suicide. It's stuff like this. They blame on Christianity not being present.
Yeah.
How do you feel about this argument? And
it's a bad argument. Like you're blaming all of this stuff on this one thing declining. You're ignoring all of the other social, economic factors. And like, of course you are, because you don't know about any of these and you aren't voting based on any of them. So like, I don't even know how to engage with it half the time.
Yeah.
Like, of course, crime could be going up. It could be some stat that they just read on some weird website that told them, or like my neighbor said that the crime is bad. Or I guess now recently people are eating pets. Like, you just make shit up and push it. And we're at that point now that someone would just be like, yeah, they're eating your dogs, they're eating your cats, and people just believe it because the authority figure said it. Right.
Well, you know, I do think that I don't think, and this is pretty hyper specific, but I don't think Trump is an even like very supported president. The people that do support him are probably more supportive of him than any other president that's ever existed before. You know, so it's definitely gotten more cult-like. But I think the actual numbers of support, I think he's a pretty disliked president on both sides.
But that's the key for like Christian nationalism. It's like one of the people in charge, like Paul Weyrich, he had this idea of you don't win elections with the majority. You win them with a highly organized, highly motivated minority who shows up to vote and puts the guy in. And that's how we get Trump.
That's scary. Okay. This is interesting. Well, yeah. And, I think, I don't know, man. It's hard because I'm trying not to be internet brained and and in the same experience that you shared earlier, like the religious people that you've talked to, they seem devoted, and it seems like it's affected their life in a very genuine way. But I get what you're saying. Like I get all these backhanded things.
I tried to do the whole let's play both sides for a bit and see like how far I get. And then like the more I did it, the more I'm like, no, I think one is just fair. Not even wrong, just like they're getting the wrong information. Like it's like facts don't even matter. Not even like a whole, oh, this is objectively true. Just like a thing that we can agree on as a concept. Like pro-life's a pretty good example of like people agreeing on one side, hey, this is a tissue, it's growing, cells are dividing, it's a process, life is a process, and we would define life by like autonomy from the mother, that it's self-sustaining on its own. Whereas on the pro-life side or anti-abortion side, you would go, life starts because the process has been kicked off. You have the cell, conception, and then the potential of this thing becoming like a fully developed person is why it's life. These are completely different positions.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And one is being funded by the Koch brothers.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have to ask then, what is your opinion on abortion then? Like, where do you draw the line? Where is this distinction and why?
I think having unrestricted abortion is pretty reasonable because, like, who is going to be carrying a baby for 9 months and then abort it? Like, you would have to be addicted to pain or causing yourself suffering. The vast majority of abortions happen in the first 12 weeks. And if they happen anything later than that, that's because of, like, severe health complications for either the child or the mother. And it becomes kind of like this, it's a tragedy when it happens. Like, people don't want it to happen. But if we're restricting this becomes a problem. And if we restrict it based on rape, life in the mother, whatever, that still becomes okay, what's rape? What's life in the mother? And like, I don't think these policies have been very good at distinguishing any of these. Like, someone could be raped in a marriage and they'd be like, oh, that's not rape.
Yeah.
You can't get an abortion. You're stuck with this.
Right.
And you can't get divorced because we're going to go after that next.
Yeah, this is interesting. I think if you say that abortions don't happen past a specific point, then I guess what's the harm in drawing the line there? Like, so if you say like most abortions happen, like abortions aren't happening at 9 months, why can't we ban it then? You know what I mean?
There's always the possibility that some complication would happen.
Right.
And
but I guess
having it there is just good as the safeguard for those fringe cases. If we limited it and like someone was having issues right before they were giving birth and like they will die.
Well, don't pro-life people make that concession? Like, the life of the mother is above the mother.
Yeah.
Is above the...
But I can never really tell how convinced they are. I think it feels like they're just kind of saving face.
Right. And that's probably true too. I guess like my perspective on it is that there's probably a level of consciousness that this is when a thing is being harmed. There's like a level of like when you can now deploy a consciousness, and this happens at about, I think, 20 weeks is what they say.
I just remembered with that whole thing, there is the other half of the pro-life argument that doesn't get talked about as often. That's about euthanasia, where people cannot be euthanized, period. Like, if you're a vegetable, you are staying a vegetable.
Of the pro-life movement who say that? That's wild. A lot of people just don't even know how to engage
those be like,
with
hey,
this.
pick up your cross, carry it. You're suffering. We all suffer.
Yeah, well, true. Damn. Well, true. Well, the idea is that, like, once you hit 20 weeks, it's developed this, like, level of consciousness, and then generally all these other things are going to be true, too. Like, it's viable and all these other things.
But then we're, like, figuring out, like, oh, yeah, we know it's conscious. Like, we're making all these very big claims about, I don't know, would that be metaphysics? Like, we know this baby is conscious here.
Consciousness is hard, but there are a set of developments in the brain that we can point to that would establish what we would consider a consciousness. Yeah. And we can push that date as far up as we want to be safe, but it certainly isn't 9 months. And it certainly isn't 8. It's probably not 7, 6, whatever like the 20-week mark is. Like, it's certainly not 9 months, and so, when I hear stuff like that, like, that seems like an extreme position to allow an abortion at 9 months. That seems extreme to me. Because then it's like, what are you...
Generally, for this whole argument, though, like, they are going all in. Like, you are killing a baby. Like, this zygote is still a baby. They are going to push it to 0.
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm saying. Like, against... I think it's not a stable position for the pro-choice, but, like, the other position is also not stable.
If we're talking about this other position, like, if we are pretty clear of what life the mother means, like, obviously we could restrict it to be earlier and have like space for these fringe cases.
Well, and I think when you talk about life of the mother, again, you're kind of avoiding like what pro-life people are trying to say is that this is a life. And they think that it's a human soul. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so like when you say like life of the mother, even that's a hard decision for them. And they say like, let's do the mother. You know what I mean? Because they're trying to wrestle with this, but like it's a hard decision for them. So when you say like, let's do 8 months, it's not really addressing or even like what the conversation is.
The life of the mother also has another interesting component that they completely ignore, where they're focused on her dying on the medical bed, and not the conditions she will be living in with this child.
Right. And that's a whole other thing too.
Just disregard of the mother, pretty much, for this whole entire argument. Which
I would say
bothers me to no end.
Yeah, I would say when you're thinking about abortion, to have like a productive conversation about it, you have to accept just momentarily that it is the same as killing a 30-year-old person, whatever's inside them at all moments. And then it becomes very clear what you can and can't say. So even saying that the mother is uncomfortable or even in excruciating pain, you probably wouldn't argue that you should kill a 30-year-old person because the mother's in excruciating pain or like even just mild pain. You know what I mean? The argument becomes very clear, like what you actually have, it boils it down to what you need to actually talk about. It's like, okay, it's not a 30-year-old person. That's what you need to say. You know what I mean? All these other external things I find like muddy the conversation and make it so much more emotional than it needs to be.
Well, it is an emotional conversation. And I think just all the directions they spin it off to makes me really think they don't care that much about the child.
And hey,
just adopt it.
This is very
no
true.
one adopts
them.
Hey, send it to foster care. Oh, no one's going to do that. Oh, the mom will just raise it. Well, she can't afford a child. Like, this is going to be a horrific childhood. Or like, oh, single mothers, give him a father. Okay, he's abusing her. Like, they have no way of like answering any of these. Like a good... Like, they call it Planned Parenthood. This doesn't mean no parenthood. This means Planned Parenthood. We are planning to have a child at this point. And, like, I can't remember this off the top of my head where I remember seeing this, but if I recall correctly, like, the majority of abortions happen in families that already have children.
Really? That's very interesting. Like, that's very interesting.
The issue seems to be people want more children. And it's like, why? Why do you want more children? And then you get into like this weird, you go down the Christian nationalist rabbit hole and you get into like great replacement theory. And you're like, oh.
Yeah, that is wild.
Okay, we're going here. And obviously some people are in like it's a baby. Like, we think you're killing a baby. And honestly, I think I could, like, those people might be able to be talked to. I don't think they're malicious per se, but there are a lot of bad actors.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Getting a good faith abortion conversation is challenge level impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'll say. I did have a conversation with the pro-life president on campus. Very respectable dude. And that felt good faith.
Yeah.
It felt good. I don't think it ended in a productive way, but like he approached it in a way that I thought was like acceptable.
And that's an interesting organization of like the top levels of it are on the Council for National Policy that like Paul Weyrich and all these Christian nationalist people are on. So they're funding. They're also funding like Turning Point USA. They're funding like the Heritage Foundation.
Do they do Young Americans for Freedom?
I believe so.
Oh my god.
Or they're either funded or adjacent. So they'll shuttle money between some of these organizations. And you just follow the money up, and it's there, it's at the top, and it just feels so manufactured. And they're taking advantage of so many people that like do legitimately want to help people, that care about babies, that care about mothers, that care about like their communities, their churches, and they're kind of dressing it up in this like, you're threatened.
Yeah.
Unless you do this, your whole way of life will collapse. So vote for us to ruin the environment. Vote for us to kick out all of the immigrants, all of the minorities, maybe to genocidal extent. I don't know. Like, kick out any way of like privacy in the bedroom. We're going to control your sexuality. You will be having children to feed the workforce. And you are going to, I hate to say it, you are going to own nothing and eat bugs or whatever. Like,
eat bugs is wild. Yeah, I do. Like I said, well, I guess I didn't specify this. It's kind of like Occam's razor. You know what I mean? Like, you should probably accept the simpler option, and to purport this like crazy conspiracy that is born purely out of maliciousness to.
Oh, but it's not. That's the funny part.
Well, and that's what I was saying. It's like, it's much easier for me to accept that like maybe it started that way when 5 people were doing it, and then now that millions of people are involved, or like, you know, they receive this kind of information, there's genuine. Yeah. Like, vast majority is genuine. Which,
it's like, I don't think they wanted Donald Trump. I don't think they wanted him at all. And now it's just kind of going.
Now they just have to deal with it. Yeah.
It's great. Like, this is the best way it could have gone.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. And I guess I'm glad you're not purporting this like evil, like villain, you know, but it's like, it's gotten out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, they obviously had a political agenda, and it was very efficient. Like, this is not even like it's all connected. It's literally just follow the money. You go to the top. And this is what our visiting speaker was talking about. She like kind of went about, like, she went through all of these organizations and noticed like the people on the rosters, where they were connected to, where they were meeting up. And like, it's pretty convincing. Like, it's very convincing. And it's like how you can see people on the right wing change their talking points so quickly. It's because you have this media apparatus that can kind of just, okay, this is the point we're going with, spread it down. And like all these things on like the Heritage Foundation, like Project 2025 is pretty big right now. They're like, look at all these organizations affiliated with the Heritage Foundation. Like, these are all under the same branch of stuff. Like, this is basically just a circular argument that's reinforcing itself by making it look like people are approving.
Do you think this happens on the liberal end of things?
Not nearly as much. And when they've tried it, it's not that efficient, because liberals are very much the whole, I've got my idea of morality, I want to push it, I want to push my policies, my interests. Like, the right wing usually says like, hey, George Soros, he's doing it, he did it. But like, you look at these organizations he's funding, and they're doing stuff, but like, they aren't really arguing. Like, they're arguing all the time about how they should implement it. While as the Republicans, they've decided. Thing, they've got like this center thing for like legislation that they can push to all the states at once. It's just like, it's a factory. You can just shuttle it in and have people lock in line.
So do you think Trump has just kind of like put a cog in this whole thing and like just turned it around and made it to where it's even hard to justify anymore?
Yeah. Okay. And I love that, because like, they were really good at making it justifiable. Like, this has been going pretty explicitly since Reagan, of like, hey, we're the side of moral values, family values. Right. We're about keeping this like country free. And you got Trump. And it's just like, okay, is he moral? Now, is he family values? No.
There's multiple families,
but you're still saying these family values. What does that mean then? Oh, it means he's homophobic. Okay, that's what family values means.
Right.
Okay, he's got Christian values. This means he doesn't like immigrants. I guess that's what Christian values are. And then we look back, oh, yeah, that is what they were.
Yeah. Well, you're not necessarily addressing the truth of like whether or not like family values are good. You're mostly saying that it's weaponized regardless of whether or not it's true or not. It's because I like the idea of family values.
I want to go off that because I agree with that completely. The problem is they choose these words that people like family values. That sounds common sense. Like I want to build up American families, have them so they have the resources to be educated or whatever. And like a bunch of people will be like, oh, they're supporting family values. I'll vote for that. But then you go to like the Family Research Council and they're like, it's the gays.
Yeah.
They're tearing apart the American family or like something like that. But like people don't know that. They just see family values and they're voting for it.
Well, that's the logical extension though, right?
Yeah.
Of like family values. Like you don't blame them for.
No, I don't at all.
Yeah.
Because like this is all like under so many like, it's like God again, like where it depends on who's using the word and why. And when I see these organizations using it, it's definitely in that like malicious intent. But when it's like Joe Schmo conservative, like he probably is just kind of in his small town, doesn't really have any information other than this. He's probably not hateful at all. He's just kind of going along with it.
That was my thing. Yeah, he's probably not hateful. And this is a distinction that I made. And I'm trying to find a better way to communicate this. But there's like the ideas that people don't interpret. They just spew out again. And so now these people are getting blamed for spewing out something that was meant to interpret, but they are just, you know what I mean? So it's like, no, like what you're purporting isn't, you're just Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're just saying what Ben Shapiro says.
Yeah.
But you actually have your own thoughts in there.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to attack your thoughts. I'm just saying that like what you're spewing has not been internalized yet. You know, and people are getting blamed for purporting the messages directly of people above them when that's kind of unfair. They're kind of victims. You know what I mean?
That's the worst thing. It's like I don't think these people are bad. They're just like it's like an information game where like people have been exposed to like a very specific type of information and like this is all tied to the Christian nationalism again because like they took over, not really took over, but they provided like Christian radio across like the whole Midwest and it's all kind of under the same umbrella of like we're gonna beam this down to them, give them this values. Then you have Fox News, you've got all this other like alternative media that happened, I believe, after the 80s because news had to purport like both sides. Like that was a rule until it wasn't one anymore. And they're like, cool, we just provide alternative media. And you get echo chambers, you get all the nasty stuff. And then the internet just, I thought the internet would make it better, but no, it just makes it worse. The algorithms are just awful, and I don't even know where to end it.
Yeah, see, maybe. Although I do like to think, because I'm just a naturally positive person, I do like to think, though, that like with the worst aspects of the internet, you have also allowed people to become incredibly, I guess, like educated.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're
self-educated.
Yeah, the ceiling is a lot higher, but also like the floor is way lower. You know, it's just expanded.
Anyone can say anything they want.
Yeah, exactly. But like the level of education you can gather is much higher and easier, which is really cool too. So, because I feel like I've been exposed to a lot of things that are really awesome.
Yeah.
You know, I've also been exposed to a lot of things that have been terrible. So, and I guess right now we're attempting to use the internet to do exactly what we just complained about, which is random ass people, you know, talking about things and then reporting it, you know,
spreading misinformation online.
Exactly.
Like I probably said something wrong.
That's what we're here for, you know? So, but yeah, Matthew, we're running on a bit over an hour. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of close this episode out, maybe summarize, talk about your club, or summarize some of the ideas and maybe leave a message that you want people to know. But the floor is kind of yours to wrap us up.
Cool. So I think the issue itself, as I've kind of said before, isn't really religion. And we are the secular student alliance. That doesn't necessarily mean the non-religious club. We definitely accept religious people that like believe and live out their values. We think that the church should be separated from state for, as you can see, like a lot of reasons that I've kind of gone into earlier. I think it kind of kills the debate a bit, and it like with how easy it is to rig the political process with religion. I think it's good to have a stage separate for that. But we welcome non-religious people who are interested in that and not having Christian nationalism be everything. We're interested in having like kind of open discussions about these kind of controversial topics like abortion. We talk about LGBT rights. We read banned books every month. We're doing banned book club for all the books that they ban in public schools. Like, hey, we're gonna be sneaky. We're gonna read Genderqueer.
No.
It's pretty good. Why did they ban it? But it's a very chill place. If you're looking for like an alternative community to religion and maybe you're deconstructing religion yourself, we provide a safe space for that. And we would love to have you.
All right, Matthew, it was awesome having you on. I thought this was a really cool conversation, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was so much fun.
Good.